24 minutes past 7. That's what I like about radio, by the way. You never know what's going to happen. A story crops out of nowhere. Someone with experience, first-hand experience, is always listening, and they offer some useful observations. Last night I mentioned to you that the respected Mideast journalist Robert Fisk has written an article in the Independent newspaper in the UK called The Demise of the Dollar. He's talking about the US dollar. Now, we already know that it's sliding compared to the Aussie here in Australia. It's now up at the ridiculously high level of 89 cents. The Australian dollar is now at 89 cents US. I mean, crikey, we'll have parity by the end of the year, which would be remarkable in itself. But in the article, Robert Fisk has written that one of the most profound financial changes in recent Middle East history is occurring. Gulf Arabs are planning, along with China, Russia, Japan and France, to end dealing in dollars for oil, moving to what's described as a basket of currencies, including the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan, the euro, gold, and what they describe as a unified currency planned for nations in the Gulf Cooperation Council states, the oil-producing states mostly, including Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait and Qatar. These meetings up until this point have been described by Robert Fisk as secret, that they've been held by finance ministers and central bank governors in Russia, China, Japan and Brazil to work out a scheme which will mean that oil will no longer be priced in US dollars.
This story started with a series of conversations with bankers here in Beirut. I then took it to the Gulf, and I've just returned from Hong Kong, where I spoke to some senior Chinese bankers, and all of them have insisted that this is correct. There was some doubt about the interest of Germany, in fact, which is one reason why I didn't stress that in my report. But one of the Chinese bankers said to me, including there was a broker sitting at the table, he said, "Believe me, your report is correct, but you will receive a thunder of denials." And indeed, that is what happened, and I heard the thunder, and I remembered that conversation. It's interesting that China has not come out with any huge denials. Russia has, of course, up to a point, and the Gulf Arabs, but it's in the interests of the Arabs and all the nations involved to deny this is happening at the moment. But we're talking about an event, a project that would not actually have its fulfillment, de-dollarization, for another 9 years. We're almost a decade away. At the moment, no one wants to bring the dollar down. First of all, because they don't want bad relations with the United States. And secondly, they've got too many dollar reserves to want to hurt themselves.
What does this mean? Well, I've asked my completely unpaid financial consultant from Leithner and Associates, Chris Leithner, to do a bit of digging around and come back in and tell me. Chris, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I think it's probably worthwhile starting on a bit of a history lesson, first of all. How was it that it came about that the US dollar was the currency that was used to trade securely internationally since World War II?
Right. In 1944, towards the end of the war, at a cute little town in New England in America called Bretton Woods, the victorious powers, which was basically the United States and to a limited extent the UK, decided on a range of things. Amongst other things, they created the International Monetary Fund, they created the World Bank, and they basically decided that the US dollar would be what's called a reserve currency, which gives it basically a privileged status for all manner of things, including world trade. Critical difference between...
So it was an agreement between the two surviving industrial powers of World War II, the dominant powers, UK and US.
An agreement between 30-something powers, of which far and away the most important one was the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, etc., Latin American republics, and so on. But for all intents and purposes, America agreed with itself, with the acquiescence of the UK, that the US dollar would henceforth be the biggest kid on the block. Critical point about the US dollar is that from 1944 began a process which ended in 1971, that it became what's called a fiat currency, F-I-A-T.
I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets,
which is about as reliable as the vehicle which comes to mind. In the good
what does that mean? What is a fiat currency?
A fiat currency is backed by nothing apart from, quote, the good faith and credit of a particular government, which should bring a smile to our face, if not ribald laughter. In other words, in the good old days, namely in the 19th century, the pound in your pocket was literally backed by gold. The dollar in your pocket, with the exception of the American Civil War, was backed by basically something that people from time immemorial, from the beginnings of human history, had attributed a definite value to, namely to gold, and in the United States to a limited extent to silver. So in other words, the purpose of a bank, amongst other things, if you had a dollar in your pocket, you could exchange it for a certain amount of gold, and vice versa. But today, you can exchange your dollar for, 5 20-cent pieces, for 10 10-cent pieces, but the value, in fact, is conjured out of thin air.
It doesn't have inherent value anymore.
Precisely right.
Okay, now the Bretton Woods Agreement, designed to do what? What came out of it? A couple of major financial structures came out of it, didn't they?
The International Monetary Fund, which is, if you like, simplifying drastically, an organization of developed countries, now particularly Europe and the United States, but China is becoming much more significant, to regulate financial flows and the like. And the World Bank, which, again, simplifying drastically, is to help to push up what used to be called the third world, the developing world, to increase standards of living, places like Africa, Asia, and so on.
So it was the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II which set up the architecture for the modern international finance system.
In a word, yes.
For the globalised world, as it were.
Basically, that's right.
All right, now, that stage, America was the big trading partner, the industrial giant, the muscle of the global economy. That's
right. It was basically the last person left standing in a capitalist sense after the Second World War. Obviously, the Soviet Union bulked very large, but not in a sense that would have much to do with international trade flow. So, in effect, America could write the rules, but it wrote the rules with a fair bit of agreement from countries like the UK, Australia, Canada, and so on. Now, the critical point with this sort of a fiat currency is that, unlike gold, which is relatively difficult to dig up out of the ground, if you want to increase the money supply in a gold standard, you have to hire someone to go and dig it out of the ground. If currency is not backed by gold, increasing the money supply is incredibly easy. You simply turn on the printing press or its modern electronic equivalent. And the trouble that's occurred is that America's privilege as that reserve currency, or the US dollar's privileged position as that reserve currency, has been vastly abused. That, in effect, they've run the printing presses at a vastly increasing scale over the years, and certainly since the middle of 2007, the amount of bond issuances, just this week as we speak, $162 billion US of bonds are being issued. In other words, the volumes are vastly greater than we've ever seen before. Other countries, notably China, to some extent Japan, Russia, are looking at this and saying, the more dollars that there exist,